CNN is learning that a piece of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's underwear and a blood sample were used to help identify the elusive and barbaric ISIS leader prior to Saturday's deadly raid and afterwards. This comes as moments ago, President Trump tweeted out a photo of the hero dog involved in the operation, though the dog's name remains classified.
The Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish allies that the U.S. had in Syria, say they had an informant inside ISIS who led them to where Baghdadi had been. They were able to obtain a piece of his underwear, use a blood sample, all of this to establish a DNA identity before they went on the raid. All of this as we learn additional new details today about how the raid unfolded. U.S. aircraft using bombs, missiles, and rockets to destroy Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's compound. After special forces used the cover of darkness, 8 helicopters carrying as many as 100 U.S. Special Operations Forces landed at a compound in northern Syria. They entered after blowing holes on the side of the building, believing the front door might be booby-trapped. The president said the special ops teams were met by local gunfire on the ground that was quickly squashed. At least 2 ISIS fighters were captured. According to the president, Baghdadi was chased into a tunnel by military dogs while bringing 3 children with him. The tunnel came to a dead end where he eventually detonated a suicide vest that killed him and the children.
He's dead. He's dead as a doornail.
Baghdadi's remains were disposed of at sea by a U.S. military aircraft, according to 2 defense officials. But the world may be about to see even more of what happened during the 2 hours U.S. commandos were on the ground.
We do have video, photos. We're not prepared at this time to release those. They're going through a declassification process.
The president painted a picture that the ISIS leader was weak.
He died a coward. Crying, whimpering, screaming. And
Iraqi officials say 2 months ago they captured one of Baghdadi's closest collaborators. He is said to have provided information about one of the couriers that Baghdadi used. That courier was killed, but documents led to his wife, who then led them to more paperwork with Baghdadi's location. Baghdadi, who'd been on the run for more than 5 years, was eventually tracked down with the help of intelligence from the Kurds. The withdrawal of U.S. forces from Syria had a major impact on the operation, according to one U.S. official. U.S. troops now are moving back into Syria's oil fields to keep ISIS from coming back and selling oil to finance its operations. But for the first time, a specific nod from the defense secretary that U.S. troops could find themselves defending against other military forces. Does that include denying access, preventing Russian or Syrian forces, which now have changed the battle space?
So the short answer is yes, it presently does.
Okay, so let's go back to this. Here's a picture, again, of the dog that the president said went on the raid with Delta Force commandos. They are not yet releasing the name of the dog. We can see his face or her face, but the dog's name under Delta Force rules remains classified. The dog apparently taking off any nameplate, any identifying marks of his or her identity. The dog, we are told, suffered some electrocution injuries, but is recovering. And look, military working dogs, the U.S. military can't conduct its operations these days without them. They are vital partners on the battlefield. But even this dog, its mission was to bring justice to the families of so many hundreds, if not thousands of people that suffered at the hands of Baghdadi's ISIS. Jake?
All right, Barbara Starr from the Pentagon, thank you so much. Let's bring in Michael Leiter and Seth Frantzman to talk more about this. Michael Leiter, you ran the National Counterterrorism Center under both President George W. Bush and President Obama. The president gave a lot of details when he spoke on Sunday, talking about the death of Baghdadi, describing the compound, the tunnels, a bit of the flight path, the confrontation with Baghdadi. Now, look, I'm a journalist. I love as much information and detail as possible. But as a former counterterrorism official, were you curious? Were you grimacing at all? Were you worried about he was giving too much?
Yeah, I mean, he made me cringe in a couple of moments. All the detail is great. It's wonderful for TV. It's a wonderful show, but there really is that risk of disclosing too much. And I'm not quite sure the president has a finely tuned ear for what is sensitive and what's not sensitive, because we're going to have to do this again, whether it's in Syria or other places in the world, and the tactics, techniques, and procedures are ones that will have to be repeated. So we really have to protect that. In fairness to the president, we had the same problem after the mission to kill Osama bin Laden. There was a significant amount of criticism that too much information was released. The more information we release, the harder it is next time, the more vulnerable our people are to being hurt.
Oh, yeah, I got a lot of information. It just wasn't by the president in front of a press conference, but there was a lot of information that came out.
Absolutely.
Explain to me about this part about a Kurdish informant getting part of Baghdadi's underwear. How would that be even used?
Well, that is probably used to get the DNA sample. So as soon as you have that blood or a body part, if there's any residue from the individual, then you use that to get the DNA sample. And then that DNA later on can be used to verify the identity, as it was reported was used in this situation.
So only after the death to verify, but not necessarily ahead of time.
That's right, but it can also be used in other ways, because if you know DNA, then you can also test other people to understand familial relationships.
Oh, okay.
And that can also be used for sources and other efforts to get closer to that individual.
Seth, let me bring you in. You've covered ISIS extensively. You're out with a new book. It's called After ISIS, America, Iran, and the Struggle for the Middle East. First of all, I mean, obviously, big credit to the special operators, the intelligence operatives, and the Secretary of Defense and President Trump for this operation being such a success. Put into perspective how big a blow the death of al-Baghdadi is, and the death of his potential successor.
Look, I mean, I think symbolically it's very, very important that he's been killed. It's like the bin Laden raid. We know that there's something like 14,000 ISIS fighters at large. So there's certainly a lot of ISIS people out there. And that means that in Iraq and Syria, even if they're not swearing allegiance to Baghdadi or his successor or the next guy, they're still going to be there, just like al-Qaeda in Iraq became ISIS years ago. So the problem and the threat is still there. I was in Iraq just last month, and we peered through binoculars with the Kurdish Peshmerga, and we could see 2 or 3 ISIS guys in a cave down there between the Peshmerga and Iraqi lines. So these guys are out there and they're plotting attacks, and I think the overall kind of cliched root causes has not been solved.
And Michael, you were critical of President Trump for the withdrawal of U.S. troops from northern Syria and what the Kurds considered to be a stab in the back, a betrayal. Do you think that they are not getting enough credit for whatever help they might have provided on this mission, the Kurds?
Well, they were mentioned in the same breath as Syria and Russia, and I don't think they should be. Unlike those two countries, the Kurds are our allies, had been our allies, and yes, their intelligence was critical here. And what is most important is going forward, their intelligence will remain critical, but we are no longer in a position to collect that because of the movement out of Syria by both U.S. troops and the Turkish incursion into northeast Syria. So I think they deserve more credit and they deserve more loyalty going forward, because we need them to be our ongoing allies.
And Seth, Baghdadi was holed up in northwestern Syria, an area that's known really more as an al-Qaeda stronghold. Al-Qaeda and ISIS not necessarily cooperative. Did his location surprise you at all, and what do you read into it?
Yeah, I think the location is very, very problematic. It's just a few minutes or so from the Turkish border. It's an area that they're smuggling. It seems, according to reports, that some of Baghdadi's relatives have been smuggled through Turkey to get to him. We know that large numbers of ISIS members not only came through Turkey, but then fled back to Turkey after Raqqa was destroyed in 2017. So I think there's a lot of question marks about why Baghdadi was found so close to Turkey. What did Turkey know? If Turkey claims that it needs to go into Syria to create a safe zone, for instance, where the Kurds are, how come Turkey wasn't raiding this house? How come Turkey wasn't the one that had actually found him? I think that raises a lot of question marks. And it also means, what was Baghdadi doing there in Idlib? Was he trying to recruit more people? What was his agenda?